What's up, my teacher community? Dr. Beasley here, and today we're talking about goals. Now, most of us, if we want to plan and accomplish something, we're going to set a goal, or you should be setting a goal. Now, whether you consider it something big, small, short-term or long-term, personal, work-related, whether you write it down or just keep it in your head, goals serve multiple purposes. They help to keep us focused on a task. They motivate us to be productive. They give us direction. They measure success, give us clarity in decision making, and keep us accountable. But to do so, the goal needs to be clear. And a SMART goal can help provide that direction and give that clear sense of accomplishment. So today, I'm going to be talking about SMART goals, what they are, how and why you should be developing them, and hopefully get on a path to planning, focusing, and accomplishing something. The concept of SMART goals was developed in 1981 by a business consultant named George Duran. He recognized that most goals that were set by businesses were too vague and oftentimes complicated, and they didn't advance or move the business forward, nor did they clearly indicate any level of success or accomplishment. So in a paper he wrote titled, "There's a Smart, S-M-A-R-T, way to write management's goals and objectives," he developed a way for managers and leaders to remember 5 key aspects of goal setting, which improve their chances of success. And although originally developed to help businesses, SMART goals have become extremely effective for all of us, especially in education. Now, goals are or should be part of your personal and professional life because goals give you a sense of direction, purpose, focus, and if they're realistic, you're more motivated and you tend to work a little bit harder to achieve your goals. So setting a goal is the first step to accomplishing anything, especially anything important or meaningful. And using the SMART method can encourage you and give you a clear direction towards reaching your goal. People who develop goals using the SMART method tend to have a lot more success in reaching their goals. So what's the difference between SMART goals and any other type of goal? Well, SMART goals are a lot more specific. SMART goals help identify those important outcomes or results that need to be accomplished and identify a clear understanding of those steps in the process towards reaching the goal, which increases the chances that the goal will actually be achieved. SMART is an acronym that means specific, measurable, achievable, relevant or realistic, and time-bound or timely. Let's start with the S, specific. Being specific in writing SMART goals means you're answering the who, what, where, when, and why of the goal. Now, clearly answering these questions significantly increases the chances of accomplishing the goal. So you want to consider questions like, who's going to be involved in this goal? Or what specifically needs to be accomplished? Or where is the goal going to be achieved? This may not always apply, but at least for educators, it's usually in the classroom or classroom related. Also, when does the goal need to be achieved and why does this goal need to be achieved? In other words, what's the point? Now, something to note when being specific in writing your goals, you want to avoid using vague terms or vague verbs like improve, increase, or even understand, because these can't really be measured and they don't explain or require any specific action to accomplish the goal. So instead, use action verbs like create, develop, write, something that requires a specific action or outcome. The M stands for measurable. Clear criteria needs to be included in the goal to determine or measure progress or performance outcomes. If there's no criteria, then it can't be determined if progress towards meeting the goal is actually being made. The measurable part of SMART goals answers questions like how many, how much, or how long? How do I know if I've reached my goal? Or what is the indicator of progress? Making your goal measurable is going to help you to answer these questions and making it more effective. The A means achievable. When you set a goal, you need to identify realistically exactly what you're working towards. A SMART goal needs to be achievable and attainable. This helps with motivation. And although the end result is usually clear, the skills or resources needed to reach that goal may or may not be available. So for this one, you want to ask questions like, do I have the resources and capabilities to achieve the goal? And if not, think about what's missing or think about what is actually needed. Also, what knowledge, skills, or resources are required to reach this goal? Also, based on constraints or limitations like financial factors, is the goal realistically achievable? Addressing these questions is going to help you to refine your goal. R stands for relevant or realistic. A SMART goal also needs to be realistic or relevant to what you're trying to accomplish, meaning it should make sense and can be reasonably achieved given the time and the resources that you have available. I mean, you're not going to run a marathon in a week with no training, or you're not going to become fluent in another language in a month. So you want to ask questions like, does the goal make sense? Or is this goal realistic and within reach given the time and the resources and abilities available? Also, are you able to commit to achieving the goal given the parameters that you have? And finally, the T stands for time-bound or timely. A good goal, a SMART goal, needs to be time constrained. It should have a clear start and or a clear finish date. If the goal is not time constrained, then there's little motivation towards achieving that goal. Usually when general goals are made, the mindset is, I'll get to that eventually, but sometimes eventually never comes. So a target date and or deadline needs to be included to provide a sense of importance or urgency towards reaching that goal. So ask yourself, does the goal have a deadline, or by when do you want to achieve the goal? Let's say a teacher is informed by their administrator that they need to use more informal assessments, especially to check for student understanding before giving a test. They also want you to include this as a goal on your improvement plan or your lesson plans. So now you'll need to develop a clear and specific goal to address this. Maybe on your formal assessments or your test, students don't seem to perform well, or they don't seem to demonstrate an understanding of the content that you've been teaching. So you might start your goal by saying, I plan to use more informal assessments. Sounds good, but it also sounds more like a wish or an idea instead of a goal. So how can this be revised using the SMART method? Well, first, you can consider the criteria involved in the process of making a SMART goal. Remember those essential questions to ask within each part of the SMART goal process? What specifically needs to be accomplished? You'll need to identify some specific informal assessment methods that you plan to use in the classroom. And so you might want to incorporate the use of dry erase boards, for example. So you'd say something like, I'm going to use individual dry erase boards for my informal assessments to check for student understanding. Okay, this sounds a whole lot better, but we're still missing some pieces to make it a SMART goal. So the next essential question is, how will the goal be measured? So think about how many times those dry erase boards are going to be used and when they're going to be used. So you might say, I'll use 2 informal assessments each time I provide direct instruction introducing new content. I'm getting a little better and more specific, but now you want to ask, is this doable or achievable? And I'd say, yeah, I think it is. Informal assessments should be used for most lessons anyway. Most don't take time to administer. They don't interrupt instruction. They do provide quick results, and they give students an opportunity to let the teacher know whether or not they're ready to move on. Then you want to ask, what's the relevancy, or is this actually realistic? Well, informal assessments do provide a quick, in-the-moment check for student understanding. They help let the teacher know if they need to review more information, reteach some concepts, or move forward with the lesson. So I'd say, yeah, it makes sense, and it doesn't require any unrealistic resources. Unless, of course, individual dry erase boards and markers for each student is not an option, but otherwise, this is realistic and within reach. And lastly, you want to ask, by when do I want to achieve the goal, or is there a time frame in which this needs to be done? And this would be completely up to you as the teacher, depending upon when you and students have access to dry erase boards and when you plan to give your formal assessments or informal assessments. You might want to start using those the very next lesson you teach. It might be during the next unit, or it might be leading up to a final exam, or during every lesson. But some time parameters need to be determined. So you might say, my goal is to use individual dry erase boards as an informal assessment at least 2 times during my direct instruction when I introduce new content, at least 2 weeks before a unit or summative test. Now, this would be a nice SMART goal. Seems lengthy, but it is specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. And it makes a whole lot more sense than simply saying, I plan to use more informal assessments. So it does take some time to develop your goals using the SMART method, but it will help you clarify the purpose of your goal, give you a sense of direction and accountability, and make you more likely to actually achieve those goals.